Hello and welcome to the reinforcement webinar. Hi Dale, you had fun with Mustangs today. That's great. I wish I was having fun with Mustangs. Do send me some photographs. Today we're talking about learning theory, basically, and we're talking about negative and positive reinforcement. And I just want to clear up, first of all, what the difference is between the two, and just talk about some examples of both negative and positive reinforcement, because people get really worried when they hear the word negative because they think it's bad. So we're going to think of negative more like sort of taking something away, and positive adding something. And just given the nature of what we do with horses as opposed to dogs, if we use that as another example of negative and positive reinforcement, what we do with horses requires us really to use more negative reinforcement. And you get a lot of I hear people say all the time, I only use positive reinforcement with my training. My training's really nice, it's really positive. And I can understand where these people are coming from, but I'm not sure that they completely understand the difference between negative and positive reinforcement, and I'm not sure that they always know what they're doing with these two things either. So let's just talk about what they mean to start off with. Hi, Tracy. So negative reinforcement, we also call it pressure release. And what negative reinforcement does is it makes a behavior more likely to occur in the future. So that's what all reinforcement does. All reinforcement makes something more likely to occur. Hello, Susan. Oh, nice to have you here. What time is it over there in Canada? So reinforcement, it makes the behavior more likely to occur. So if we're looking at negative reinforcement, let's say we use we can do the same thing with the horse and the dog. Let's say we're going to be leading the horse or the dog. So we might put some pressure on the lead rein, and when the horse or the dog walks forward, we'll release that pressure. Okay? Same thing in both cases. In both cases, that negative reinforcement actually works really well. Works very well with horses in lots of other ways as well. So if you want the horse to go forward under saddle, you might put your legs on the horse, and as soon as the horse walks forward, you might release. Negative reinforcement would also be used with your voice. So with the horse or the dog, you might cluck at the horse to move forward, and you might I don't know, what do you do with your dog? I cluck at my dog as well. I don't know that the dog gets that, but I do make silly noises at my dog that I make with the horse as well. So all of these things, even your voice, is pressure. This is pressure release, negative reinforcement. So what happens is you stop putting the horse or the dog under that pressure when you get the right response, or when you get the response that you're looking for. And so that's negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is you add something. So that's like plus, as in, plus and minus. The positive reinforcement is plus. So you might add a kind word, oh, good boy, or you might add a scratch on the wither, or you might add a treat, bit of food, for example. Now, dogs respond well to positive reinforcement. A lot of dogs will respond quite well to being patted. So will horses. Most dogs respond really well to food rewards as positive reinforcement, and I think more so than horses. And there's a lot of reasons why that is, and I want to talk to you about that. And I'm not saying you can't use food as a reward for a horse. I think you can use food. I think people get confused because they think about positive reinforcement and they only think about food, and that's just not right. So what we want to do today is just clear that up, make sure that we understand when we talk about positive reinforcement, just what it is we're referring to. So we've got reinforcement and we've got punishment. Just talk quickly about the other side of the scale. So reinforcement, positive and negative, and we've got punishment. Let's think of some positive punishment. Means we're adding something. So add a smack. Punishment in general reinforcement, punishment, you want the behavior to happen less. So you want the behavior not to occur again. Whereas reinforcement, you want to encourage the behavior to occur. So punishment, we want to stop the behavior from occurring. So let's say your horse bucks and you smack it with the whip. That happens after the bucking, and that's the punishment. We're adding it, positive punishment, and we don't want the behavior to happen again. Okay, so that works. You know, for some horses, sometimes punishment can work. It's generally not a good idea, and we'll discuss why that is in this webinar. The other one is negative punishment, and this one isn't used as much with horses, or at least you don't think it is, and you need to think about this a little bit. So you're wanting the behavior not to occur in the future, and you're taking something away from the horse. Now, what does the horse want? More than anything, probably, the horse wants companionship. And so apart from food and water, and believe me, people do deprive the horse of food and water because it performed badly. I'm not sure that's going to work, actually. And there's a lot of reasons why that won't work. One of which is the horse is probably incapable of putting the two things together. So let's say the horse does a bad jumping round and you put it back in the stable and refuse to give it any water for 3 hours or something. The horse, you all know the 3-second rule, right? The horse can associate the bad jumping round for about 3 seconds. Not all the time it takes to get back to the stable, be untacked, blah, 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 and then stand in the stable thirsty for 3 hours. The horse is never going to put that together. But yes, sadly, it does happen. That's negative punishment, taking something away that the horse wants. So another example, and a much more common one, I hope, is people socially isolating the horse. And this happens a lot, actually. And if you ever heard, and I'd be interested, especially we've got quite a few people from the States on, have you ever heard of tying the horse to the tree of knowledge? Yeah, the horse is usually left alone somewhere to think about all the bad things it's done. And this tree of knowledge, apparently, while the horse stands there in social isolation and gets very frustrated and quite upset, apparently showers down all sorts of terribly great things, and apparently it can teach your horse all sorts of wonderful things if you tie it to a tree for 3 hours. Okay, but there it's negative punishment because we're taking something away. We're taking away the horse's social network. So we're isolating the horse from either from us or from us and its herd, or it might be a place. And no, there's an American that's all Canadian that's never heard of the tree of knowledge. Maybe we call it the tree of knowledge over here. But you have heard the principle, people tying the horse up. And they quite often just do it to a pole. You tie the horse up, you leave it alone. Basically, you let it work it out for itself. I remember years ago when I first moved back to Australia, I went and had a look at a horse to buy, actually. And I got there, and this horse had no hair at all on her pasterns. I thought, what's happened to the horse? And they said, we put hobbles on her, and she didn't like it, so we just left her to work it out. Right, okay. So this horse obviously struggled in these hobbles for hours to the extent that she had no hair left on her pasterns. And that is, negative punishment because you're taking everything away from this poor horse, aren't you? And is the horse learning anything? No, probably not, other than hobbles is terrible and people are pretty awful. So anyway, those are the two things we're dealing with. We haven't talked about, yes, we've talked about positive and negative punishment, and we've talked about positive and negative reinforcement. So what if you don't have either? What if you're not using either? And if you're not using either, what you've probably got is relentless pressure. So let's have a look at a really classic example, a really simple example that we can all identify with. I had somebody wrote to me this morning and said that they just started the give to the bit work, and it was good, except that the horse kept stopping. And so they weren't quite sure, because they were just on the ground. The horse was supposed to be walking around them. They weren't quite sure what to do about that, and they were asking my advice. And so what we have to do is we have to actually do one thing at a time. Now we've got to work on foundation. So your first thing is to get the feet to move. Get the feet to move consistently, then take them where you want them to go. So we were still on this first step, getting the feet to move and getting the feet to move consistently. So she didn't have that yet. So let's say you cue the horse to walk on. You're going to cluck at the horse. It's negative reinforcement. That's still a pressure cue, but it's a sound. That's fine, because it's quite annoying as well, you know, making that sound. The horse doesn't want you to do that, I don't think. So that's a pressure cue. We have that one first, and then I would lift the whip, and that's another pressure cue. The horse can see the whip, and then if it still doesn't respond, I'd tap with the whip, and if it still doesn't respond, I'd continue tapping with the whip. And what do I do when the horse goes forward? Stop everything. Stop your voice, stop tapping, drop the whip towards the ground. So all of those things. Now, we all know when the horse is getting slower in its walk, we all know it's going to stop. Yeah? But what we have to do is let the horse make that mistake so that we can go through that pattern of cues again with the horse. Now, pattern of cues shouldn't take very long. Remember, you know, the horse has got this 3-second sort of association between things. The horse isn't going to think it's something it did yesterday or something it did 3 minutes ago. The horse, you have to be quite quick with the horse to, you know, really get this idea across. So you don't want to cluck and then raise the whip and then tap and then tap a bit faster. You know, you don't want to do that to the horse because it's confusing. So you want to be really simple. So you cluck, raise, tap. Yeah? 1, 2, 3, and then increase. The frequency of tapping usually works absolutely fine. There's really rarely a reason to have to tap the horse harder unless the horse has been really desensitized to that whip cue. So it's best to let the horse make the mistake of coming back to a halt before you correct it. You see what I mean? Because if the horse almost comes back to a halt, like just starts walking really slowly, and we get after it to get it walking faster again, then we haven't actually allowed the horse to have the experience of that pattern of cues again to teach the horse. So what we've done is we've moved from negative reinforcement, where we stop the cues when the horse does what we want, to relentless pressure. Now, yes, I can understand, it gets a bit frustrating. The horse starts walking really slowly. And, you know, when the horse has consistent movement, then we can make it pretty. So then we can talk about or think about the quality of the gait. And a lot of people start with this one. They start with the quality of the gait. And so you'll hear this a lot, especially with young horses and riding instructors. You know, you go to your riding instructor and they say, oh, you know, this horse is only 5 and he needs to be in a good working trot. You know, get him really trotting, get him forward, 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 forward. And, you know, yes, that is important, but it's up here. It's not down here. What you want is you want the gait first. Then you take the feet where you want them to go. So then it's sort of direction. Then it's quality. Then you can make it pretty once you've got these things established. Otherwise, if you start with this, you're going to end up with relentless pressure because the horse is not going to be in self-carriage. What we're building here is the steps to self-carriage so that the horse learns, oh, when you've said trot, that means you trot with this gait quality, unless you're asked to do something else. So down here, the horse can make the mistake of coming back to walk, and then we go through that set of cues again, and the horse goes back into trot, and you stop the cues, take your legs off, all of that sort of things. The horse feels no tension, no pressure, and the horse remains in trot. The horse makes a mistake, comes back to walk. You put the cues on, the horse comes back to trot. The horse learns that pattern. It's an easy pattern. It's a simple pattern. And horses are great at learning patterns. The horse doesn't want the pressure. That's the whole point of negative reinforcement, is to remove the pressure. Let the horse make the mistake in the beginning so that it learns the pattern. So once it's learned the pattern, You ask it to trot and it trots. There we go. We're really starting on good self-carriage here. We've got self-carriage of the gait. The horse now knows when it's asked to trot, it stays in trot. Now we can make that pretty. So we can then talk about quality of the trot. So we've taught the horse to trot and to maintain trot, which is great. Let's say we want an extended trot. So we're already in trot. The horse knows that if we want to canter, we'd ask for canter. We'd cue canter. It's a different cue. It's a whole different series of cues, just like the trot was. So the horse then knows if we ask for more speed by, say, clucking, giving it the trot cue, the horse will think, well, okay, I'm already trotting. So the only answer would be more trot. So the horse will give you more trot then. Then you can start changing the length stride and changing the speed of the trot and tempo and all that sort of thing. So that's really useful. But you've got to remember that there's a big difference between negative reinforcement and relentless pressure. There's a relentless pressure, which is what you get sucked into if you correct that horse before it makes the mistake. So back to the girl this morning who was doing walk, give to the bit, and the horse kept stopping. If she can see that it's going to stop and she corrects it before it stops, she's not giving that horse the opportunity to learn, which is unfair to expect the horse to do anything other than really desensitize to that go forward cue. And then what's going to happen with that horse is going to become one of those horses that you need to ride every stride, push, 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 because that's what it's been taught. What it's been taught is that it gets a bit slower. She needs to come in and tap it with the whip or cluck at it or do whatever it is. So she's teaching the opposite of self-carriage. She's teaching the horse to be carried by the rider. And that's a result of reacting, the handler reacting too fast. So not letting the horse make that mistake, not giving the horse the opportunity to learn from that mistake that it made, which was falling out of walk and stopping. So I think that is really important. And what happens is you become really aware of the cues you're applying when you remember what sort of reinforcement you're using. So let's have a look then. Let's have another look at punishment. Because, if you ask anybody, do you use punishment in your horse training? Pretty much all of them will say no. This is an awful word, isn't it? It's a terrible word. And we know that punishment actually doesn't work very well with horses. So it's good, that you don't, but do you really not use it? Okay. So, and we need to think about what's the difference between punishment and correction. Okay, so let's have an example. So I'm just going to have a quick look at a message here. Yeah, sorry, Susan, I'm positive punishment. Susan's asked her, isn't that positive punishment? Hobbles, isn't that positive punishment? Well, yeah, it depends. The situation I was talking about, the horse was left on its own, so that's negative punishment. And yeah, I was talking about the social isolation more than anything else. But yes, probably generally the hobbles are positive punishment. So anyway, where was I? I shouldn't read the things while I'm trying to talk to you. What we're talking about, some help here. I've completely lost my thing. That's right. We were talking about the difference between punishment and correction. And so if you ask somebody, most riders, and say, do you use punishment in your horse training? They'll say, no way, don't use that. So do you ever correct your horse? I say, yeah, correct it, yeah. Okay, so let's have a look and let's define correction. Well, correction is something that we do after the behavior has happened in the hope that the behavior will not reoccur. So correction makes the behavior less likely to occur in the future. So let's say, as an example, we've asked the horse to stand. Let's say we're leading the horse, we've we've asked it to halt. And the horse steps forward. We could tap the horse on the cannon bone with the whip and step back. There we go. And that's step back. Okay. So that is, unless we've set out to teach step back, yeah, what we've actually set out to teach was halt. Yeah. So by tapping the horse on the cannon bone, we're using positive punishment to stop that behavior of the horse stepping forward to happen again, or to make that behavior less likely to happen again. So it is a sort of positive punishment. If we could use exactly the same technique of tapping the horse as a form of negative reinforcement to teach the horse to back up, that would also work. And I'll look at some videos in a minute doing exactly that. The thing is that it's the definition and the timing of it that tells you what it is. And the problem with saying that it's okay to correct your horse, but it's not okay to punish your horse, is that the difference between correction and punishment is only in the handler's mind. So what for me might be a correction, for you might be a punishment. And same thing, what for you might be a correction, for me might be a punishment. You know, for you, giving the horse a good old wallop across the cannon bone might be fine as a correction. You know, the horse knows what it should have done, did that wrong, bang. You know, for me, I'm like, oh gosh, that's really rough. So I think what's important is that we realize what we're doing when we do it. Like, we realize, am I trying to make that behavior more likely to occur in the future or less likely? Punishment is very reactive. So we're trying to stop something that's already happened from happening again. And so it's easy to know when you're punishing the horse. And think about it in terms of dogs as well. Like, you know, honestly, if you smacked a dog across the face, the way a lot of people do with a horse goes to bite you or something, you give it a good wallop on the face. I was just looking at my YouTube channel. Actually, I've got a video on there about a horse biting. It's quite a violent film of horse biting me. Actually, I've still got the mark on my arm. And I've had a couple of comments that I haven't bothered replying to yet. One of them says it's a dominance problem, and the other one said I'll just whack it in the face. So anyway, that is quite a common reaction. You know, horse bites you and you punch it in the face. If you did that to a dog in public, you'd be prosecuted. And do it to a horse, no, it's fine. You know, it's the same. It's the same thing. You know, we are so far behind with horse welfare compared to dog welfare. You know, you look at the horses with these really tight nosebands on, they can't even swallow. And whereas if you did that to your dog, you'd be prosecuted. And, you know, you go out and you go to the Olympics and do that with your horse, no problem. So there is a big problem there. So what I want you to do as a result of today's webinar is to think about what you're doing when you do it, and just make a mental note. You know, okay, I'm leading my horse. We're going to saddle up. I'm leading my horse. I put some pressure on the lead rope, walks forward, I release it. That was negative reinforcement. I, you know, tied him up and praised him for standing still. That was positive reinforcement. I popped the saddle on his back, and he turned his head around and looked at me like this, and I thought he might bite, and I said, oh, get off. That was positive punishment, okay? Be aware of what it is that you're doing and try and fit it into one of those 4 quadrants. If you can't fit it into one of those 4 quadrants, I think what you'll find is you've got relentless pressure. So if any pressure you have or anything that you're adding to the horse or taking away from the horse will fit into one of those 4 quadrants, or you'll be talking about relentless pressure. Okay, I want to go into the training for a minute and have a look at some of the little videos that I've got in there about negative and positive reinforcement and punishment. So we'll go in here. There we are. and into my courses. This is in the resources section. I've spoken to a few of you recently, and I don't think enough of you go to the resources section. So go to the resources section. There's a lot of good things in here. Here it is. Okay, the first good thing in here, while we're here, I'm just going to tell you about this, is the checklists, all right? Go and have a look at the checklists, download some. They are really useful. So we'll go back. Okay, right. Now, here, learning theory. We're going to go in here. Okay. Now, this first video is all about negative reinforcement. So I'm just going to let you watch that while I talk you through it. So I've got pressure on the horse's head collar, and I've slowed this down so it is in slow motion. And I'm holding that really, well, gently, but consistently. I'm not jerking on it or anything. And as soon as the horse lowers its head, I release it. There's negative reinforcement. You put a pressure on the horse and you release it as soon as the horse responds in the way you want. And at this time, he didn't pick his head up so high. And you could just keep working things like this little exercise you can do until you put a cue on that. So if I put something before then, like, you know, scratched his ear or did something, a pre-cue, then quite quickly this horse would learn when his ear was scratched, he should put his head on the ground. And the horse will learn whatever pattern you're setting up. So just be really careful that you're setting up a good pattern, because the first cue will become the cue that the horse always responds to. So there's negative reinforcement, pressure, release. Negative punishment, and here we're going to go with the horse tied to the tree of knowledge or not. And here he is, he's tied up. You can see all of his friends are in the distance. They're all having breakfast or something. And I've tied him up here. And still I'm standing behind him, so I'm even going to take myself away from him. So he's left in complete social isolation. And that's probably one of the worst things that you can do for your horse. They really don't like that at all. And nor do we. I mean, it's quite understandable. So he's starting to get agitated. That's something I really never want him to do, is he's pulling a little bit on the lead there. You know, he's walked backwards a couple of steps, and you'll see in a sec when I start to leave too, he gets increasingly agitated. So, you know, it's a mistake to think the horse is ever going to teach itself anything you want it to know on its own. You know, and so if you do tie your horse to a pole and leave it there for a while on its own, then don't expect it to have learned anything useful to you, because it's most unlikely this is the sort of thing it will have learned, to paw and to kick and to pull back. So positive reinforcement. Now, as I said, this doesn't always have to be in the form of food, and I don't use food much here. This is positive reinforcement in the form of a scratch, and I'm telling him he's good. So we've got two forms of positive reinforcement. We've got a kind word, a soft word, and a nice scratch on the wither as well. And both those things work really well for positive reinforcement. Now here, you can see I'm using negative reinforcement, and keep tapping until that left foot moves left, and then I bring in the positive reinforcement. And it's very rare that our training would ever be one or the other. Training is pretty much always a mixture of the two. So positive punishment is our last one. And here, I want to stop the horse from pawing like that. And so the pawing behavior happens, and then I tap to stop it. So I want that behavior to be less likely to occur in the future. And look at that, he's stopped doing it. No, he hasn't. See, punishment doesn't work. So yeah, that's that is a really useful, obviously I've just taken the sound off there for you so we talk through them, but do go and have a look at those. And then I talk about the timing in this final one and how you can use the same cue whether you're teaching via negative reinforcement or positive punishment. And here I'm teaching the horse to back up using that tapping on the cannon bone cue, which is the same cue as I used, or the same form of punishment as I used when I was getting the horse to stop pawing. And so, let's sort of think about an example of how we would, use both positive and negative reinforcement. Having discussed already the fact that punishment doesn't work well with horses, then what I want to talk about now is how you can get away from that and how you can use positive and negative reinforcement together, and why it's not a bad thing, and it's very rare that somebody really can use only positive reinforcement, although you hear it all the time. And so people that tell me, oh, look, I only use positive reinforcement, my first answer is always, oh, that's interesting. Do you lead your horse? They go, yeah. Do you ride your horse? Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Well, you can't actually put a head collar on the horse and lead the horse. You certainly can't ride the horse without using negative reinforcement. So the simple fact is they're not understanding what form of reinforcement they're using. That's all. And I did an experiment a couple of years ago with 100 horses, and it was very interesting because we were only looking at negative reinforcement, and we taught the horses to back up through a corridor using just rein tension. Okay, that was the only thing. So the handler who did this, she had to pick up tension on one rein and get the horse to back. So every time the horse took a step back, she released it, and then she'd pick it up again till the horse backed, and then she'd release it. Now, these horses got 8 trials, so 4 on each rein. And what we found really, was that every horse did it more quickly. So what was happening was the horses were anticipating the rein tension, and they were backing up. They also got faster, so they learned the pattern. We back up, and then we walk around, and we back up, and we walk around. So they learned the pattern, and they got faster, and she needed less and less rein tension over the period of trials too. That's really important, because what we often forget is that negative reinforcement, yes, it's all about pressure, but training is all about making the pressure required less and less and less. So not more and more and more, right? So what we don't want to do is desensitize our horse to pressure. We want to sensitize our horse to pressure. We do that by setting really good patterns. So if it's, let's take the example that I had in the experiment. The horse has to back through a 5-meter corridor. Okay. We put the horse at the start of the corridor. Let's say it's on the left. We pick up the left rein, and maybe we have to apply 10 newtons of pressure to get the horse to take a few steps back. Okay, a horse does that. You pick up the rein again. Maybe, the horse is starting to think about this, so maybe 9.5 newtons of pressure, and the horse steps back. And then you pick up the rein again, maybe 8 newtons of pressure, maybe less. You come around, you do the other side, and then you get back to the left again, go to pick up, and the horse goes, oh, hang on, I'm learning this. You're going to pick up that pressure. So the horse might start to react from 3 newtons of pressure, or less and less and less. And what will happen if you're consistent? And we found actually that the handler who did the 100 horses, she did all of the horses, got so much better at this. Like her timing got really good. If you're consistent, your horse will learn to anticipate that and will react before you get to picking up any pressure. And that's when it's become this automatic response. So you go to pick up the pressure, and the horse says, oh, I know what's coming, and it just goes backwards because he's learnt that pattern. You've established a really good pattern for him. Horses, really don't like being surprised, and nor do we. It's no fun. You want a pattern. You want to know what might happen next. You want things to be predictable. So does your horse. That's what gives you and the horse confidence. But what was really hard about this experiment was not doing anything else. Like, when the horse did it really well, what you want to do is you want to give it a scratch and say, oh, good boy, that was good, well done, You want to do all those things, but they're positive reinforcement, and we were isolating negative reinforcement. So I think it was really very difficult to do. You'd be surprised how hard it is not to engage with the horse and not to reward the horse with positive reinforcement. And for the whole 100 horses, the handler found that difficult. From the first horse to the 100th horse, every time it was difficult. It was unnatural. It was weird, and it just felt really strange for her. And I think you'll find that as well. Like, so next time you're around your horse and you're, even just feeding or whatever you're doing, think about that. Think about when you've got pressure on your horse, whatever. So it might be verbal, it might be physical pressure. Think about what sort of pressure you've got and work out when you're going to release that. What does the horse have to do for me to stop clucking at it? What does the horse have to do for me to stop putting pressure on its hindquarter? Whatever you're doing, have that in your head so that you know when you're going to release it. So, you see people quite often, you'll be out on a trail ride or something and you'll all stop and you'll be looking at something and someone's on the phone or whatever. A lot of people are just hanging on to their horses' mouths. And that's pressure, right? So if you find yourself in that situation, think about that. Okay, I'm hanging on to my horse's mouth. When am I going to release this? What is the change in the horse that I want that I'll release on? And if you ask yourself that question, you're going to become much more aware of having pressure on your horse. And you'll release it then. You say, actually, I'm not asking my horse to do anything. So there is no reason to have any pressure anywhere on the horse. So also be aware next time you're with your horse when you're using positive reinforcement, because I think what we need to do as riders and owners and people that are engaging with equitation science is we need to be more realistic about the forms of positive reinforcement that work well for horses. And I think that a scratch on the wither and a kind word, and, those sorts of things work really well for horses. Now, I said right at the beginning of this webinar, I don't often use food as a reinforcer for horses. And I want to tell you why, because I find, because I've been a trainer, which has meant that I've dealt with a lot of very anxious horses, and horses that have got very bad histories. As a trainer, nobody really brings you their horse until it's sort of at the end of the road. And, until I'm so often the last resort. By the time somebody's going to pay me to do something with their horse, they've quite often been through a whole horde of really cheap trainers as well, which hasn't helped me either, or the horse. But you end up in this situation, where you get really, really anxious horses that have had a very bad history. Now, with a horse like that, let's take a trailer loading example, because it's so common. These horses have quite often been through horrendous experiences with people, well-meaning people trying to get them on trailers. And then the idea that you could bribe a horse onto a trailer that's terrified using food is ridiculous, because unlike a dog, a horse is a grazing animal. So horses eat for 16 hours a day quite happily. Now, and that's just what they do. A dog in the wild might eat every 3 days. So food is highly motivating for a dog, because they're programmed to think food is important. Whatever food they can find, they've got to eat, because especially if you're a beagle or something, because they don't know when they're going to eat again. It might be days before they get anything else again. Whereas a horse, they're programmed just to eat all the time, just to graze. And walk and graze. That's what they're programmed to do. So offering the horse something, given its ethology, is not the same as offering it to a dog. So dogs, I find I can get my Doberman to do almost anything for a treat, and it doesn't even matter what the treat is. It could be a bit of carrot, it could be anything. He'll do anything for it, absolutely anything. Whereas you get an anxious horse, what I find it does, actually introducing food, is confuse the horse. It really does. It adds another element to the lesson that the horse can't deal with. So if you take the trailer loading example, the horse can cope with walk forward, negative reinforcement, with the pressure of the whip on the hindquarter, for example, and being released when the horse steps forward or thinks about stepping forward. That makes sense to the horse. And you then try and bribe it with some food to come forward. It's very confusing, because you're adding something else, and the horse can only think of one thing at a time. And really, I don't want that to be food. The other problem with food in the trailer is, and I've seen it so many times, it's unbelievable. If you've got a horse that races off backwards and people put like a hay bag or something at the front, what the horse does is it gets all the way up to the front, grabs it, chucks its head up and runs off backwards. And, then it ends up hitting its head, and the whole thing gets so much worse. The other problem with food rewards is that it's very hard to raise the emotional level with a food reward. So if we think about, let's say we want the horse to do a better canter strike, or let's say we want the horse to piaffe, right? Because that's quite a high emotional thing, piaffe. It's really just trotting on the spot. Every horse can do it. Some will be prettier than others, but every horse can piaffe. If it can trot, it can piaffe. But it's quite a high emotional requirement. It takes quite a lot of energy to piaffe. So you also see piaffe with a lot of liberty people. They've taught their horse to piaffe and they give it a bit of carrot afterwards. You go, oh God, that's so cool, But did the horse learn to piaffe with a bit of carrot? No, the horse didn't learn to piaffe with a bit of carrot, because you could stand in front of the horse for 6 weeks with your bit of carrot. It is never going to piaffe. Yeah? This is not motivating for the horse to raise its emotional level at all. So what happened is that was introduced as a secondary reinforcer, and they used negative reinforcement to get that behavior going. You can use the food to shape it later, and that's jolly useful, really useful. But to teach the basic behavior where you need to raise the emotional level to get the horse to engage with you, it's not going to work there. So food, I always find, is much better, if you must use it, bring it in as a shaping device rather than trying to get the horse to learn a behavior like piaffe that requires more emotion. Food might be great, to teach a horse to stand on a platform. If you've got a horse that's highly motivated by food, not all of them are, and especially not anxious horses, then, go ahead and try it. But don't be fooled by people using food that, later at the end of the training cycle. Don't be fooled into thinking that that's all they use to teach it. Because, piaffe is an easy thing to teach. You teach the horse to trot down the long side, and then you shorten the steps up and you slow it down, and that's all it is. But it's all negative reinforcement. For me, you get the horse to trot, and then you stop cueing it to trot. You've got to release the pressure. And you can't actually get the horse excited about a piece of carrot and have it trotting on the spot when it just doesn't work. And what I find about that too, the trainers that won't tell you that, is that, they're keeping these little secrets from you and pretending that they did it a way they didn't do it. It doesn't matter. I've taught a lot of horses to piaffe, but I can tell you exactly how I did it. Might be fun. We should probably do that. It's a nice, simple lesson. Any horse can do it. I taught my polo pony to piaffe in Colorado with John and Josh Lyons, actually. She was so cute, really beautiful. So, yeah, look, it's one of those things that I want you to start sort of really thinking about the differences in reinforcement, because once you do, and punishment, because once you do, you really start to drill down on how your horse learns. And once you have a good understanding of that, you become a much better trainer and handler and rider, all of those things, because they're basically all the same, aren't they? We're always training the horse. Whenever we spend time with the horse, we're training the horse. And we owe it to the horse not only to train it, but also to be aware of what we're doing, to be mindful, to be a mindful trainer. Be aware of what you're doing with the horse and why you're doing it. Ask yourself those questions, before you touch the horse, before you ride the horse. Think about what you're going to do, have a plan, and be mindful while you're doing it. And I would be really interested to hear what you come up with over the next week about the different sorts of reinforcement you use, whether you use correction, what things you've realized that you're doing that perhaps you didn't realize before. What have you become more aware of, and what things you've changed? So come back to this page and leave me some comments. That would be really good. I'd really like to hear. Anyway, that's all I have for today. I will see you on Facebook Live this week if you're here. Otherwise, I'll see you next week on the webinar. Thanks for coming. Bye.